Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Peace or Performance and welcome to summer. I am so happy it's summer and it's just wonderful because it's been a cold winter and I really needed this season. I just love to be outside and I love to be on patios or porches. I just I love spending time in beautiful weather on a porch. Just my thing. And So, I'm kind of considering our time together, our little porch time. I hope maybe you can find yourself on a very comfortable patio chair, someplace outside or on a very cozy porch, and you're able to listen to me right now so that we can do some really good reflecting on peace over performance together. That would be awesome. Okay, so we were talking about agency. And if you're new to the channel, we're in coaching session. That's the way I see it. I'm an executive coach, but also, the peace or performance message has been put in me and it's what I'm sharing with the world. So if you're brand new to the channel, if you're brand new, you got to go all the way back to the very first episode I did. Just look for the very first episode and take a listen. It's not that long because we kind of lay out what peace or performance is, but in a nutshell, it's really your peace has to fuel your performance. And peace is an identity. It's not just this idea. So you have a peace self. Your peace self is always worthy, always loved, always learning. The performance self is responsible, it's determined, and it's achieving. And the peace self has to lead and fuel the performance self. And peace can fundamentally change performance. And where we are right now, in a series of all the different sessions I have done, and these are all coaching sessions, is we've been getting to a point where we're talking about agency, peace, self, agency, building agency. And what is agency? Agency is our ability to define where we really stand on things, what we really truly believe, and being able to really come to a place where we can honor that and meet ourselves there. What we talked about in last session is we really don't examine what we're thinking, and we don't examine the quality of our thinking to develop an agency or thoughts, our understanding, our beliefs and values on something. And therefore we don't build agency, but we go out in the world and we just to survive in the world, we get to know this performance self, and we don't get to know who we really are and what our peace self really is asking of us, or what the peace self could do for us and how it could reshape performance. So we have to build agency with the peace self. So I'm going to read a passage from Brene Brown's book, Braving the Wilderness, a book about her subtitle, The Quest for True Belonging, the courage to stand and the courage to stand alone. And it's that tension between this deep need to feel like we need to belong to something, to someone, belong somewhere, paired with the courage to stand alone. And sometimes in life, we either find ourselves alone or we find ourselves having to take a stand alone. And what that means for belonging. And so this ties back to what we're going to talk about with agency today. But here's her quote. True belonging is a spiritual practice of believing in and belonging to yourself so deeply that you can share your most authentic self with the world and find sacredness in both being a part of something and standing alone in the wilderness. She uses the word wilderness. It's really standing alone in this crazy world. True belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. Okay, well, see, here's the interesting thing from a peace or performance standpoint is being who we are. Sometimes we can get hijacked of being who we are by way of performance in the world, and the performance is what got us to belonging. The performance is what got us to belonging. And once we don't have the mechanics of performance, maybe the floor gives out on us there. You know what I mean? Like something happens where the job changes or family dynamics are, hampered or broken or, uh, the community is going in a direction we don't want to go in. And we were always accepted because, we got accepted because we did things for people, not because we were things for people. We got accepted because we did things, not because we were things to people. And when we lose that whole orientation, we can lose our agency because the agency was really just sort of, um, erected in the performance self and the performance self alone. And what we're going to talk about right now is just this whole thing is like, do we even belong to ourselves at this really rudimentary level? And so the peace self of always worthy, always loved, always learning is it needs to have agency. And so we got to figure this out. We got to figure this out. And part of it is some of us have been racing so much in life, racing, with demands of life, whether these things were demands when things were going great and we were just keeping it all going, or whether things were going horribly wrong in life and we were just trying to survive moment to moment to moment. We were racing and throttling through life, grinding through it. That this establishing of agency you know, just with the peace self, just never had its time. So maybe today we can give it, maybe today we can give it some time. So we're going to reflect. That's what we need to do. We need to reflect and to reflect really well together in session, this patio or porch time that we're having together today. We need two things. We need openness to be open, and we need curiosity. So another one of my favorite books I've gone back to many times is David Gray, Liminal Thinking. You're going to notice a little theme here, how I'm really always getting into how are we thinking? How are we thinking? And David Gray has a great book about liminal thinking. But what is liminal thinking? Okay, let me just read a little piece of what he says here. This is really where we can just be able to meet our thinking and examine it so we can potentially change our thinking when we need to. So here's what he says. Have you ever had moments in life when you suddenly saw things in a new and different way? Like, when have you seen something that you saw it one way your entire life? Or maybe, and that's it. And suddenly now you now see it in a new way. What is that? Um, a new way of seeing the world or seeing yourself opens a door to change and growth. So what we're doing here in Peace or Performance is I am asking you to become a liminal thinker. I am asking you to do this. I'm asking you to become a liminal thinker and to look at yourself maybe differently, because I have come to this. My own journey of coming to Peace or Performance was what I saw in myself, reflecting back, working with my clients for 20 years, is so much of this world is caught up with identifying who they are and their entire agency on their performance self, when yet another piece of you exists in the peace self that God tenderly cares for, that you can tenderly care for if you can see it, if you can see it. So it's all going to come back to thinking. So what he goes on to say, David says, you can cultivate a way of thinking and being, you can cultivate a way of thinking and being that will allow you to have these breakthrough insights more often. With liminal thinking, you'll be able to guide others to similar mind shifts that will give them power to transform their lives. This way of thinking um, creates new doorways to possibilities. And so liminal thinking, and I love what he says. The word liminal comes from the Latin root limen, which means threshold. And oh my gosh, this is going to take me down to a place because I think of Christ saying he's knocking at the door. He's literally knocking at the door. And it's like we are at a threshold. A threshold is a border, a boundary, or an edge. It's a marginal in between space that defines two things while at the same time being neither nor one or the other. So, what we do in the world is we look at the world and we have to assess it pretty quickly to survive in it, right? And make up our minds, and we have an experience and we decide that's who we are. And we go through life like this. And David does a beautiful job in this. I mean, you've got to pick up his book. And and then we think, for instance, your performance self is all of the reality. Like, in other words, we meet the borders of who we are in that reality of everything we've given to life through performance. And yet the peace self is just there, and it can reshape and change everything. So it, really can literally, when the peace self starts taking over, it can change a lot of things. Listen, for me, it helped me let go of, living in, Atlanta and living in this intense life that I had. It just was like it suddenly didn't have the same meaning to me anymore because I had changed. I had fundamentally changed. Uh, so, okay. So, openness and to be open. And now there's curiosity. And I don't know if any of my fellow readers out there are, if any of you are biography readers and know of the famous author Walter Isaacson, who's written many famous biographies. But he says the one trait that tended to change the trajectory of everyone that he met and did a biography on was curiosity. What he said about curiosity is so great. He says, I have the words here. Curiosity is a desire to observe things carefully. It's a desire to observe things carefully. The desire to observe things carefully. When we are just locked into the performance self without peace, being basically defined by everything else, but truly what's in ourselves, and um, not slowing down or not asking ourselves the right questions, um, we lose curiosity of ourselves. We become transactional to ourselves. And we no longer have an ability to observe things carefully. And when you can't observe things carefully within yourself, you tend not to be able to observe things carefully around you either. So, for you to be a great liminal thinker, we have to hold on to this curiosity. What we're talking about to come to this place of, engaging agency with our peace self, it's going to mean we reflect, and it's going to mean we reflect in an open way, liminal thinking, with open inquiry, with real curiosity, to have careful observation. Okay, so what we want to do now is we want to really be able to sort of step away from a performance self view of ourselves, that very responsible you, very determined, which, like I'm saying, none of this is bad. The responsible, determined you and the achieving you, they're not bad. It's not bad. I just want you to like pull back from it for a minute and look at yourself through the lens of your peace self for a moment, and look at yourself through always worthy, always loved, always learning. And we're going to use that lens, and we're going to reflect, and we're going to reflect in a liminal thinking way with careful observation. And I'm going to help you reflect by introducing this model that you see up here on screen right now of where your thought life lives for you and me. And yeah, this is a model I just came up with so that we can have this conversation effectively. And I want you to just get the language down that, our thought life, travels through levels. Some thoughts only stay on one level and never move to another, but here we are. So, level one at the very top is shared and social. Of course, these are thoughts that we have that we hear in our head and then we speak out and express to others. And maybe we share it with many people, but people around us, familiar with us or whatever, would know this is how we think. Okay. Easy enough to understand that. Second level down is guarded in private. I might, be more open than most people about what I really am thinking. But regardless of how private or open you are in your way of operating in the world, is every single person on this planet has thoughts that they just keep to themselves at some point. So these are thoughts that we can hear in our head. We know they're there, but we may only very selectively share them or never share them at all. And, we all have that. And these are guarded and private. And then there's hidden and buried. And hidden and buried is just this is this is our thoughts living in a hidden unconscious way. There are hidden files, so to speak, right? And you know, I mean, I've come to agree with what other people have written about this. I introduced you to Dr. Carolyn Leaf in the last session. Her whole thesis of much of what she puts together is that a great amount of what we do in the world and how we operate our lives comes from the hidden and buried, comes from our unconscious mind. And really being able to tap into what's going on down there. And that's where, now we live in a day and time where we can dig into this. There's so many more tools available to us now than there ever used to be. When I was growing up, nobody really talked about trauma. Now we talk about all these things. Uh, Now there's so much more language in our society, at least where you and I probably have been exposed to, where we could say, yeah, that's probably an unconscious thing. So, what we want to do here in these three levels of thought life is be able to look at them, step a little bit away from the performance self, and just look at the peace self and ask some new questions, you know, to ourselves. Okay, so now is the exact time. If you are able to see me, I want you to, take a screenshot. Take a screenshot of this model because here we are with all the levels and with all the questions I want you to reflect on. So you can take a screenshot so you can think about each of these questions. So let's just walk through them really just briefly here and before I let you go, so you can think about each of these questions. First question at the very top. What thoughts or opinions am I sharing publicly right now? And do they truly reflect my values and current reality? In our performance self, absent of peace, we can have cognitive dissonance with this one because what we can end up doing is we can end up pretending to be something that we're not just to keep up or just to be responsible or just to avoid saying no. And what is happening is in the background of our lives or in some other portion of our lives, a reality is happening. And I think one of the worst things I always tell my coaching clients that I coach in leadership environments is it's really one of the worst things that can happen is a reality is happening uh, and it's affecting how you're leading people, but you're not seeing the reality. It's like it's or not acknowledging the reality. It's but it's happening. It's going to happen anyway. It's there. So there's something going on in our lives, or some situation, or something that we truly deeply need to address, to face, to deal with in some way. And what we're really doing is we're not expressing anything around it at all. but it's a big enough reality that it's not sustainable to not ever talk about it, or to misrepresent what's really going on publicly. Okay, there's that little cognitive dissonance when the peace self isn't having an opportunity to interject and lead the performance self when we're publicly expressing realities, are they if they're not really reflecting our real values, right? We're just okay, there's that. All right, so the next question, moving to guarded and private. Here's what I want you to ask yourself. And I mean, this question is so powerful. What important thoughts or feelings am I currently keeping in this guarded space? Now, that first part of the question is really important. I, I, I mean, how often? I mean, you probably have never asked yourself this question to inventory some of the most important thoughts or feelings that you keep in a guarded space. I have a dear friend that keeps bringing something up that she's struggling with another person, a boundary that she probably needs to put up, but she doesn't want to erect this boundary because she thinks if she asks for it, it'll hurt the relationship. I don't believe that it will, but she believes it will. But what's interesting is it's an important thought in her guarded space because it's important because she's thinking about it a lot. So things you're thinking about a lot that are really important, that are having a high impact in some way in your life, but you're keeping them in this guarded space, or feelings that you're having about something, and they just are there continuously, but they're in this guarded space. Write them out. What is going on in the guarded space? And okay, here's the second part of the question. And what fear or belief is causing me to hold them back from appropriate sharing? Ooh, I mean, you could spend maybe an afternoon, at least a good half an hour on this one, where you have a T chart, you have your thought and feeling on one side of it, and then you have the potential fear or belief of not sharing it on the other side. And what's interesting is if you look at David Gray's book on liminal thinking, our beliefs come from a confirmation bias. This is my language a little bit to his material, but it's he does a really beautiful job of spelling this out. Is we have a belief about reality, about experiences that we're having with that reality, but our experience with that reality is just a footprint of the reality. In other words, the reality is much bigger than us. We can't know it all. We're not like God, know all things, right? But that reality is our reality. And once we take a footprint of that reality, we form a belief around it and we run with it. And we then just want to see it the way we see it. We put a confirmation bias on. In other words, once we've made up our mind, that's the reality because that's all I've experienced of it. That's it. So then we form a belief. This is David Liminal's liminal thinking, David Gray's liminal thinking. So we have to be able to have this careful observation when we look and we list out our beliefs on things that we're keeping in the guarded space. Follow me here. Careful observation on our beliefs to say, well, really, is that really what is happening? Just a great, powerful question on the guarded and private to just T chart that one. And then the last question, and really, I mean, because in the hidden and buried, we can't easily hear the thought, and even the feelings can be contradicting and confusing. I want this, but then I also want that. I don't know. Here's what to ask. Here's what to ask. What reoccurring emotions, reactions, or patterns are in my life that might be signals that are thoughts trying to surface? And what might they be trying to tell me? And of course, I know this is one of those things where I think everybody on the planet needs a trauma counselor, right? I do, or needs some kind of true therapy. I think we all have been through things, hard things in life where we need this, but without having to go to that extent. You know, there can be patterns. There can be patterns. I um, uh, had a career crisis essentially. And I found a bunch of journals from way back when, of course. So this was even before I started my years before I started my executive coaching. And I was in a career that I didn't fit into at all anymore. And there was every time I was going into the same kind of role that I had in my corporate career, I was having the same cycle of issues over and over and over again. Because what it was telling me was what the thought that was emerging there that I couldn't see at the time for a long while. I mean, I'm reading these journals, I'm like, oh my gosh, now I could see what was going on. But the thought and the feelings were all leading me to this thing of saying, I don't belong in this anymore. I do not belong in this work anymore. And the fear I had in my performance self is I couldn't clearly see at the time what the next thing needed to be, but I knew I was not, I wasn't connecting with myself in what my career was anymore. I didn't fit into it anymore. But because I couldn't see what it needed to be clearly at the time, I was staying in this restless, unproductive pattern with every role and every job I had. But I was in sort of this purgatory with it. But I was afraid to pull the switch, to take a leap, to figure it out, and so I was just cycling. But the emotions and the reactions and the things just kept repeating. And so patterns, what's I've noticed that happens with patterns, like particularly really, really unhealthy patterns that we have, that where we're suppressing something inside ourselves, is the patterns tend to get louder and more arduous. And when we cycle back to the pattern again, it's more exhausting when we go back into the loop. It's like, I'm back in this thing and I'm tired of being back in this thing. Well, one more time down the road. It's like I think about, in scripture, there's so much with how God interacts with us individually, but how God interacts with us from an entire humanity perspective. And the Israelites, in Moses walking around the mountain for 40 years, like just going around, couldn't get there because the pattern just has to keep repeating and repeating. And it's really painful as it keeps repeating. But, we finally ask ourselves, we become finally open. And when we finally get into a liminal space and we finally really examine our beliefs, and I was finally like, okay, you know what? I'm not going back into the pattern anymore. I'm not. And it's amazing thing, right? When it finally happens, when you recognize you finally exited a pattern. And sure enough, when that happens, there was a thought, something that we pushed back. And see, the peace self is extraordinary self-compassion because it allows you to at least acknowledge a pattern and not be in this harsh, judgmental, self-loathing place of being angry with yourself for being in the pattern. And that's what the performance self does without peace. The performance self will be your accuser when it doesn't have peace. And it'll say, what is wrong with you? What is wrong with me? Why can't I do this? What is wrong? Instead of saying, what's wrong? What's this pattern? How many times have I seen it? What might it be telling me? Okay. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up. One more quote. And this is actually in the back of Brene Brown's book that I read from earlier. And it's a quote from a woman named Roshi Joan Halifax. Uh, and it's really appropriate. Really appropriate. Okay, here we go. All too often, all too often, our so-called strength comes from fear, not love. Instead of having a strong back, many of us have a defended front shielding a weak spine. In other words, we walk around brittle and defensive, trying to conceal our lack of confidence. If we strengthen our backs, metaphorically speaking, and develop a spine that's flexible but sturdy, then we risk having a front. Ah, then we can risk. Then we can risk having a front that's soft and open. And I just, if you have your performance self through and through, and peace is not fueling it, you will appear, and you and I will both appear to have a very strong backbone about things. But is it really strong if it's not grounded in a deep love? If it's all about fear, fighting the world, fearing the world, performance, 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 is it really strong? I say strength really comes from the peace self, the always worthy, always love learning peace self. That's the strength. That is truly the strength that allows us then to exhibit our performance in a way that's soft, but yet strong. Okay. And it's been awesome to be on the patio or the porch with you, right? It's been awesome. Okay. I will be back here again this summer to you, but a little bit to chew on. We're going to go again even deeper next time we get together. You have a very good July 4th, and I just adore you guys. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here with me. Okay, till next time, I'll see you later.